But with that jail open 24/7, the how and particularly when are still up to him. Could he try to slip in under cover of darkness? Will he want to get it over with or wait until the last possible minute? There's one more fascinating possibility. Could he try to steal the media spotlight from his Republican competitors by surrendering smack dab in the middle of Wednesday's first debate? No matter when he chooses to arrive, once there, the process is automatic. He'll be booked, fingerprinted, have his mugshot taken, a first for the ex-president. Throughout the morning, he's kept up his version of a defense on social media, attacking the officials who indicted him while also releasing this video portraying himself as their victim.
The test of a man is how much he will bear for a cause which he knows to be right. How long will he stand in the depths of despair? How much will he suffer and fight?
I want to bring in NBC's Vaughn Hilliard, who's been following all of this from Atlanta. Greg Bluestein is a political reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and an MSNBC political contributor. And Carol Lamb is a former federal prosecutor and an MSNBC legal analyst. So, Vaughn, what's the latest from Trump world? Do we have any insight into the discussions about Trump's next move or, as everyone's waiting to hear, what the timing of his surrender might be?
Right. We know that there are deliberations that were continuing overnight into exactly when he will come down here to Georgia. We know that he will be going to a fundraiser in Nashville tomorrow, so it could potentially Thursday or Friday are still possibilities, though we have seen in past, obviously, a great amount of protocol and preparation made ahead of his actual movements for his arraignments. And I think that's an important point here, is that in Georgia, he will not only have to surrender here at the Fulton County jail, but he will also have to take part in an arraignment. And those events could happen at two different times. And the arraignment could potentially be waived. It could potentially happen virtually. We're working on better understanding the actual mechanics of this here. But we know that the U.S. Secret Service has been in touch with the sheriff's office. The sheriff had previously suggested that he would treat each of the defendants coming from this potential indictment the same way he would treat anybody else that would come in for their formal booking. That would mean a mugshot. That would mean fingerprinting. And as you said, the jail is open 24 hours a day, and the deadline that was given by the prosecutors was next Friday here. So with the debate on the line, ultimately, if they do try to arrange with officials here an arraignment and a surrendering, the official booking to be happening at the same time, ultimately that will have to also be determined based on the judge's availability. We should expect this to appear on the court docket when the arraignment is formally filed here. So there are a lot of outstanding questions. And of course, the Trump team, as they make their political plans, are very much reliant on the legal stipulations that must be met here over the course of the next 9 days as well.
So, Greg, what else can you tell us about how this will all unfold at the jail and, frankly, about the jail itself?
Yeah, well, Donald Trump can waive his first court appearance, but he cannot waive the surrender, as Vaughn said. So he is going to have to show up at the Fulton County Jail between now and next Friday at noon. And my hunch is he's not going to go under the cover of night. And I know you mentioned at the top of the show, there's a chance he could do it on debate day next Wednesday. And that's what the political minds here in Georgia are all talking about, the possibility that he could sort of do a little bit of counter programming to the debate. The Fulton County Jail is not a place where you'd wish upon even one of your worst enemies. It is full of, there's been civil rights complaints. There's been a legal settlement involving someone who recently died there involving a bed bug infestation. It is not a place where we expect Donald Trump to spend much time there at all. It's already overcrowded. It's already plagued with all sorts of problems. But the Fulton County Sheriff has said they're going to treat him like they would any other defendant. And so that all signs point to fingerprinting and possibly a mugshot.
But he would, I assume, Greg, he would be in and out really quickly.
Very quickly. Yeah, we do not. They'd have to move dozens, maybe hundreds of prisoners, of inmates, just to accommodate him in a cell. So I don't think he's going to spend much more than a few minutes there.
All right, Carol, there's a lot going on legally. On Tuesday, we saw the first move by one of the defendants, Mark Meadows, who filed to have his case moved out of state court and into federal court. Rudy Giuliani made the same case on television last night. Let me play that.
The case should be immediately removed to the federal court under a statute I really doubt she thought about. I don't know if she thinks so. And that would be 28 United States Code, Section 1442, paren A, which says that any case involving a federal official or one acting on behalf of a federal official should be removed to federal court, and it should be done liberally and broadly. The presumption should be in favor of removal. So we should all file a motion in the federal court to remove the case from her and the Georgia court, ask for a trial in the federal court.
So there's a lot to unpack there, but let me ask you to do it, Carol, particularly that the presumption should be in favor of removal.
Well, the first thing I disagree with Mr. Giuliani on is that Fani Willis has not thought about this. I guarantee you she has thought about this. She is aware of it, but she is probably not that familiar with it in the sense that she has not had to deal with this issue in the prior racketeering indictments that she's brought, because those indictments were really based on Georgia events, on Atlanta events. So this is somewhat new to her in the criminal context. And what it means is that if you were a federal government official and you are being charged with state crimes, you are allowed to bring a motion to have this case removed to federal court. You would still be tried on the state charges, but in federal court. And the whole idea behind this was that this was a law that was passed back in the 1700s, and the idea was that you didn't want state courts sort of harassing federal officials. Now, this very motion has been brought by former President Trump previously in his New York case, and those claims were rejected by the federal court. They said, no, those charges, which were charges in state court about paying hush money to a porn star, were really outside of your duties as a federal official, and therefore we're not going to take this into federal court. Here, the issue is a little bit more difficult, I think, to parse out the pieces, because he was the sitting president at the time of these events, most of these events, not all of them, which is why I think Fani Willis was well aware of the possibility that this motion would be brought. But he's going to argue, as Mark Meadows has argued in this motion, that they were acting within their capacity as federal officials, looking into the integrity of the election laws. And ironically, the first look we may get at the evidence in this case may be in an evidentiary hearing in the federal courts for the judge to determine whether there's merit to the argument that they were acting within their capacity as federal officers here, or whether they were really acting outside of their duties as federal officers in trying to overturn the election.
One of the things, obviously, Greg, that this would take off the table if it got moved to federal court is cameras in the courtroom, right? And I know that as we were in the lead up to this, there was a lot of conversation about that. As you've been hearing over the last couple of days, any kind of talk about the possibility of a Donald Trump and potentially anyone else's trial being televised, have you heard anything to indicate that that might get pulled? Or is that the presumption, the overwhelming presumption that it would happen?
Yeah, that's the presumption that if it was removed to federal court, which is still a very open question, right? Legal experts, as we just heard, say it's still uncharted territory in a sense, right? But if it does get pulled to federal court, we do expect it not to be televised, although there'll be a big push from maybe even from Donald Trump's campaign, who knows, to get cameras in the courtrooms, because we know that if it is televised and if it's at Fulton County, like it would be right now, every moment would be magnified, and the court of public opinion could also weigh in on how they see the trial going.
So, Vaughn, speaking of defenses, we know Trump has teased this Monday as the day he's going to give us all of his evidence that previous evidence has been rejected by almost every single court. Evidence that there was indeed voter fraud in the 2020 election. Have you learned anything new about that?
We know that he intends to reveal a so-called report that he called large and complex. Of course, what does complex mean, and does it have any credence to it, is the other question, because Donald Trump has propagated these election fraud claims, dating back to 2020.